Great. Thanks. So my name is Sarah. I'm an agronomist with Practical Farmers of Iowa. I'm going to talk a little bit about who PFI is, and then we'll kind of get into the details here. So we're just launching this project called Small Grains in the Corn Belt. So up until about the 60s and 70s, we grew small grains across many more acres than we do today. And we think it's time to start talking about small grains again in a serious way. So you might see that banner more often, hopefully up here even in Minnesota. So who's PFI? We're an open, group of farmers that get together to talk about what are new things that they could research on their farms, what are new questions that they have or new challenges they have, and what are solutions to those things, and then how do we share that information with each other. So in the crowd, who is a member of Practical Farmers of Iowa? I know there's a few. Great. So if you have questions about the organization, you can ask those folks. These are the major enterprises of the members of our organization. So very typical, Midwestern farm, maybe a little bit more diverse than we see on the landscape, since we're pretty much dominated by corn and soybeans. We still have hay and small grain farmers in the network. And we were started by this farmer, Dick Thompson, who's from central Iowa, back in the 80s when he said, why am I putting on all this nitrogen? Do I even know if it's paying back? Maybe I should do some on-farm research. And this is a picture of him here with his research reports. And we still do that today. We help farmers collect information off their farms and then talk about it to their neighbors. This is a really typical on-farm research design. So we have strips of green cover crop, for example, and no cover crop. And farmers would then kill that in the spring, plant corn or soybeans across it, and then give us yields in the office. They would send it to the staff and give us yields of each strip so we can do analysis to see, is corn affected by a cereal rye cover crop, or is soybeans affected by a cover crop or not? Do folks in the audience do on-farm research? Great. Should do more. Should drive your decision making, science-based decision making. And then this is a picture of Dick holding a field day on his farm where he's talking about those results. And so we still do that today. I was just at field days this week and last week. We have a bunch about cover crops in the fall and in the spring. We do about 40 field days a year. They're free and you're welcome to come, even if you're from Minnesota. We would welcome you. And farmers are the people who present that information. These are our locations for our on-farm research trials from last year. And then our research reports, and I brought our oat variety trial and some compendiums of research reports are online also and free. So from all this activity that we do, these are the things farmers have told us they have changed on their farms, and also what they're interested in still continuing to improve. So small grain production and getting better at treating small grains like a cash crop has been of interest for the past 3 or 4 years, I'd say more than ever, because of commodity prices going so low, and because, as you see right here, we're all like goo goo gaga about soil health. And we can't grow really big cover crops in between corn and soybeans. How many people have cover crops right now in the audience? How many of you do it just in between corn and soybeans, not after a small grain? You're all doing cover crops after small grains. That's great. So it's hard to do cover crops only between corn and soybeans. There's just not enough heat. So if we're all excited about soil health, we got to put a small grain back into the rotation. But then we have the barrier of where we're going to sell the small grain, how we're going to make money off that small grain, and we might get a little depressed about doing it. So PFI wants to talk about that and do some research and try to figure out those solutions. So although Mac didn't ask me to talk about this, I always talk about why corn and soybeans are leaky first. So I'll set that up, and then what this extended rotation can provide us in cleaner water, reduced greenhouse gases, maybe competitive profits on the farm, and then how do we get started? Okay, so why do I say corn and soybeans are leaky? This is a graph of Iowa's cropping system, percentage of the land planted to different crops over the past 100 years. I will show you one of Minnesota in a second. So this is percentage of the landscape on the y-axis. This is time across the bottom. And even if you can't read the legend, what do you think the yellow is? Corn. So corn acres in Iowa have basically been about 60% of our landscape over the past 100 years. What do you think the green is, the dark green? Soybeans. And what do you think the light blue is for Iowa? Oats. So I just sort of lumped the light blue into small grains with legumes, because traditionally we would nurse crop alfalfa or plant it with red clover, and then we would grow those small grains. And then up around the 1960s, some ag policies changed, and we started growing soybeans. So when do corn and soybeans grow in our landscape? What time of the year? Huh? What? So in the summertime, when the soil is very warm, when it's very hot, that's when corn and soybeans grow, because they're warm season plants, warm season grasses and legumes. When do small grains and legumes like hay, like alfalfa and red clover grow? Spring, fall, winter. Those are cool season plants. So previous to the 1970s, we used to grow a balance of a warm season corn and a cool season small grain legume mix. And then in the 60s and 70s, we decided to grow a warm season only system. So now we don't grow anything in the wintertime. And it's the same story across the I-states, Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana, and even Minnesota. You've dramatically lost a lot of cool season plants and replaced it with a warm season soybean. So that's why we see nothing growing in the wintertime, is because we've chosen to grow warm season only crops. Okay, so what does that mean for water quality, and what does that mean for our landscape? So this is data from the Raccoon River Basin in Iowa, just the change in the cropping system over time. This is one of the basins that feed into Des Moines Waterworks, and maybe you've heard that there's a lawsuit because Des Moines Waterworks is receiving too many nitrates, and they don't want to clean it up anymore for free. And so then data out of Des Moines Waterworks shows this is nitrates into Des Moines Waterworks from that Raccoon River Basin previous to the 60s and 70s, when we had more cool season plants on the landscape. Our average parts per million of nitrates is like 2 to 5. And then after that, when we make this huge landscape change, it's higher, and it's just been climbing. So our average nitrate loss is like 10 to 15 parts per million, but it can spike all the way up to 30 or 40. And that's a direct response of our farming system. So because we don't have anything growing in the wintertime anymore, that's why we have loss of nitrates, because we don't have roots sucking up that nitrogen. Does that make sense? That's why we grow cover crops. That's why cover crops are exciting, because they are cool season plants to fill in that gap. Cover crops, though, it might be hard to find the cash in cover crops sometimes, since it's not something you harvest. So small grains, sticking those small grains back into that corn-soybean rotation is a potential way to make money at growing those cool season plants. So this is where winter wheat or winter barley or winter rye would be planted, and it would cover the ground. This would where oats, spring barley, spring wheat, flax would be planted, and then it's usually co-seeded with a legume. Okay, so how does this impact diversity? How does this diversity make an impact on our farms? Okay, so this is what we do today across basically the southern tier of Minnesota and into the I-states, this corn-soybean flip-flop. And so what I'm suggesting is returning oats or wheat or barley or whatever small grain you want to grow with that green manure cover crop, and get a better balance of cool and warm season plants on the landscape. And so how does this benefit us? So from a massive literature review that was published in 2012, all crops suffer when they're grown in short rotations. So yield potential is limited the closer that crop is grown to itself. Okay, so we can see this list of crops up there. And so because we're in basically a corn-soybean rotation or corn-corn rotation, we are not achieving the potential yields of those crops that we could. Look at corn especially, up to a 36% decrease in yield potential when it's grown in a 2-year rotation or a monocrop. And a lot of that reason is because of the soil quality that we would see from that 2-crop system. So this is soil taken from a study down at Iowa State, where it's been in a 2-year rotation up in this part of the screen. This is soil from the 3-year rotation, which is a corn, soybean, oat with red clover rotation, or a 4-year rotation, which is a corn, soybean, oat with alfalfa establishment year, and then another year of alfalfa. And so which soil, if you were a corn plant, which soil would you want to grow in? Maybe ones on this side. You know, if the texture is more cottage cheese-like, that's the kind of soil we want to see. That improves water holding capacity for that root when it's droughty and it needs access to water. That improves nutrient availability to that crop. It takes less energy to grow through a soil like this. I mean, that's like, practically concrete, right? So that root's got to work a lot harder, which means it's expending energy on root growth as opposed to, filling seeds. So bulk density changes when we add more living roots to the system, more cool season plants to that warm season system. Okay, another benefit from this extended rotation, again, this is data from the Iowa State plots. We see a reduction in erosion. So because the 3 and the 4-year rotation have more cover a longer period of the time, because of that legume being out there, because we plant oats in March or April, a month ahead of corn or soybeans, we just have roots in the ground a longer period of the time. So we see a reduction in erosion. We also see an improvement in water quality. Let me explain this slide because there's a lot going on. So this is water quality data from the 2-year system at the top. This is water quality data from the 3-year system, which is that corn, soybean, small grain with legume, and then this is the 4-year. And this data is taken from like these little tubes that are buried and then water is suctioned out of them. And the water that flows into those tubes that are buried, then the nitrates in that water is measured. And so we see in the spring, this is the spring right here, that the nitrates coming out of the corn system is much higher than where we had oats and alfalfa the previous year. And then if we look in the 3-year systems, our nitrate levels are just much lower. So we just bring down that loss. Where do you think those nitrates might be going in the 3 and the 4-year system? Where? To Des Moines? No. These nitrates are definitely going to Des Moines. Thank you, I live in Des Moines. We use those little test strips that you put in fish tanks in our water bottles when I was in Des Moines and my friend brought his water bottle from Ames. And Des Moines is like right at the 10 parts per million. And Ames is like 2. It's kind of gross. But where did these nitrates go in the 3 and the 4-year system? They're in the plant, okay? Where are we going to grow corn and soybeans the next year? Are we going to grow corn and soybeans next year in Des Moines Waterworks? No. We're going to grow it on the field, right? So these are in the plant, on the field. We're keeping that nitrogen on the field where we need it, out of the water. Okay, and so this is just an infographic to show like what I'm talking about. So that 2-year system has a lot of brown, 42% of the time it has brown. And this 3-year system, in Matt Liebman's case, the professor whose project this is, he doesn't use a winter cover crop. So he could even do better than 61%. But even with that 61% increase in cover, so the soybeans, oats with red clover, and corn, he still has those water quality benefits. So he could even go to a winter cover crop and there would be even less brown up here. It could be an almost 100% covered system. Okay, so covering that soil year-round is very important. Also from Matt's study, he's able to use a lot less pesticides because that rotation takes care of a lot of the weed, disease, and insect issues. So organic farmers, for example, don't have to worry a ton about certain insects and diseases because they have an extended rotation that breaks those pest cycles. We see when soybeans are planted another year from itself, more than 1 or 2 years from itself, that disease cycle for sudden death is broken, and so we have less sudden death incidents. So we can just use a lot more pesticides in a diverse rotation because the rotation itself helps us out. And then, if companies, the Walmarts of the world are worried about greenhouse gases, they want to have, new projects that show they're working to reduce greenhouse gases. And so we see a lot less greenhouse gas use, gas emissions from the diverse rotation because we cut nitrogen fertilizer so much. And nitrogen fertilizer, this is the different fossil energy inputs for the 2-year, the 3-year, and the 4-year. Fuel for operations across it is about the same, but fertilizer, the fossil fuel energy and fertilizer in the production of fertilizer is very high. So then we have a much higher energy cost, not just in the fuel, but in the production of fertilizer, which causes a lot more emissions. So if companies are interested in that and they're like going to pay farmers more for that, or drive a demand signal by buying more oats from Iowa grown with corn and soybeans, they would get a really big reduction in greenhouse gases by incentivizing diverse rotation. Okay, so how might we get started? So this is some research results from some PFI trials, and then I'm going to go in deeper on Matt Liebman's trials to get towards some of those economics. So again, if we're in this 2-year rotation of corn and soybeans and we are interested in cover crops, maybe we have a demand for cereal rye seed on our farm, and so we're going to go to a corn, soybean, rye with red clover system. So this is pictures from a farm. The farmer had planted rye in the fall, and then in the spring he frost seeded red clover into that rye, and then took it a year, and then the next year, this is that corn emerging in that red clover. And he wanted to see whether red clover versus a diverse cover crop mix would have more nitrogen power to his corn. And so these are the red clover strips that he planted. You can see those. And then this is the diverse cover crop mix that he'd planted. And so his yield, here's another picture of that cover crop mix in the summer versus that red clover that was frost seeded into that cereal rye. So this is after the rye's been harvested. This picture was taken September 22nd. And so he sees that his corn yields were higher with the red clover. And we've seen that on a number of farms that have been doing studies similar to this, that red clover provides a lot of nitrogen power to corn. And so we might get excited about radishes and sunflowers and crimson clover and buckwheat in a big diverse mix. But maybe red clover might be a good choice for some of our fields too, because of just its staying power on nitrogen performance. So his yields are pretty good. He's excited about this red clover rye system, and so he's been trying it on other farms and collecting more data. So this might be what a diverse cover crop mix would look like, in case you couldn't see the picture I just showed, and this would be different species that you could put in that. So a really high brassica legume mix with the small grain reseeded, the seeds that you didn't harvest reseeded. And so his cost difference on those two systems, so here's costs at the top between the red clover and that seed mix system, and then the returns based on those corn yields. And so at the end of the day, the red clover did return him more than the diverse cover crop mix. And it's purely because he had more nitrogen power coming from the red clover than that diverse mix. Okay, and then from Matt Liebman's experiment, where we have the 2-year flip-flop, I'm going to show you results from the 2-year system versus the 3-year versus the 4-year. And the 3-year again is oats co-seeded with red clover, and then oats with alfalfa, and then the next year is an alfalfa hay year. So this is what oats look like, in case you've forgotten. How many of you are growing oats? Great. We're excited about oats. So this would be underseeded with red clover or alfalfa, depending on which part of the rotation. And then just to remind folks, I brought the oat variety trial in the back. This is pictures from a farm in Charles City where we have been doing an oat variety trial for 2 years now with support from Albertley Seed House. And just our findings from last year showed that the varieties Sabre, Rains, Beta Gene, Dion, and Badger and Excel were among the top performers. And then for food processors, for food grade oats, meeting that 38-pound test weight requirement, Rains, Shelby 427 did very well at Kanawha, which is just about an hour and 15 minutes or so south of here. That's on the back table. So for that oat production year, this is what Matt does at that farm down in Ames. Soybean residue is distant field cultivated. And I also want you to recognize how much tillage is used in this system. And remember that it's from those soils that I showed you that looked very good in the 3 and the 4 year. So he's able to do more tillage in a diverse rotation than we would be able to in a 2 year and still see incredible soil results. So he cultipacks, he plants this IN09201 oat variety. You can see the different things there that he does. 22 plants per square foot. He direct harvests it, breaks the straw, bales it, removes it, and then he clips the stubble. And then if it's alfalfa, he'll try to get a hay cutting off of that alfalfa. We don't want to forget the herbicide restrictions for rotating to a small grain. And I think you guys have a great handout about the restrictions. So these are the herbicides that we just want to be careful because of their rotational restriction on how many months previous, like atrazine, 21-month restriction to going to oats. So we just want to be really careful. If we're going to set ourselves up for good oat yields, we need to make sure we're not putting it on a field that's had an herbicide that's going to cause a problem. Okay, so here we're combining oats. Some people are swathing oats, some people are direct harvesting oats. We have a video coming out this winter that has interviews with farmers where they talk about when they think it's appropriate to swath, when they think it's appropriate not to. That'll be available on our website. And these are the yields that Matt's been getting over the last almost 10 years down in central Iowa. So with the 3 year, the oats are yielding around 93 bushels per acre, and with the 4 year, around 98. And his test weights are ranging from 33 to 38, so an average of 35. So probably what you all are getting, I would guess. Your test weights might be a little bit better than ours. And then you can just see that year-to-year variability, whether it's in the red clover system, which is the red, or the alfalfa system, which is the blue. And then if you're not co-seeding with red clover, this is what it might look like. And so he comes through and cuts that stubble to get rid of weeds. Then this is what the seeding year of the red clover looks like in the fall. And this is what that second year of alfalfa would be looking like. So you can see his plots are very big. This is field scale equipment that he does this on. And then alfalfa yields are averaging 4 tons per acre over these last years. And so sometimes he gets 4 cuttings, sometimes he only gets 3 in that second year. And then we just see the difference in the amount of nitrogen power from those 2 cover crops. So in that red clover, we're getting about 155 pounds of N in that first year, going to then our next year's corn, and that alfalfa is 121. And that's really because we're doing some hay harvest on the alfalfa. And then in the 3 and the 4 year system, Matt is using almost exclusively cattle manure, and that's providing about 100 pounds of N. Okay, and so because he's using the red clover and the alfalfa and using cattle manure, he's able to really back off of synthetic fertilizer, and that's that big fuel greenhouse gas cost that I showed earlier because of the embedded energy needed to create nitrogen fertilizer. He's using biological fertilizers instead. And so in the corn and soybean, in the corn year of the 3 and the 4 year, he can back off of synthetic purchased fertilizer by 88 or 92%. And I'll show you the yields of the corn in a second here. So then this is what corn harvest looks like on those fields. That's a lot of residue. And then these are what the yields look like in the 2, the 3, and the 4 year over the past about 10 years. And so 189, 194, and 196. And in the 3 and the 4 year, don't forget, we backed off a synthetic fertilizer, 88% and 92%, because we're using that cattle manure instead and those legumes. Okay, so now what happens to the soybeans in that system? So if we add this extra rotation, add this extra year to the corn and soybean system, what happens with diseases? Do we have sudden death issues up here? Yeah, I'm assuming yes, because you have very similar soils. So, you know, we all know what sudden death looks like. It's kind of a surprise, and we can't do anything about it. And it's a disease that's on the roots. And so a number of years ago, Matt had the opportunity to see it really side by side in his plot. So this plot right here has been in that 3-year rotation for two cycles, and it was in its soybean phase. And then this plot had been in that flip-flop 2-year corn rotation for a number of years. This was in 2010. And you know, all of the 2-year soybean plots just had a lot of sudden death pressure, and they were right next to, in this phase, the 3-year rotation, and the soybeans yielded great. So that's got to be because of that rotation effect. That distance of soybeans from itself, better root structure, better soil structure, which improves root health from those different soils that I showed you, from that legume. And so in the 2-year, the 3-year, and the 4-year, this is the SDS incidence, the sudden death incidence and severity over the last 4 years. And so we just see a lot more pressure of sudden death in that short rotation compared to that 3 and 4 year. And so this is why in that original slide I showed that yields can decrease of crops when they're grown in a short rotation. This is why. The soil isn't providing a good home for those roots. And so then we have problems, and that decreases yield. Okay, so then if we look at it over time, soybean yields are higher in the 3 and the 4 year because that disease pressure is really kept down. Okay, and so then how does this land financially? So we see over time of this entire project, this is the peaks and the valleys of that, you know, bottom line. In the 2-year rotation, the 3-year, and the 4-year, diversity just creates a lot less extremes. So we're able to control our input costs more because we're not purchasing synthetic fertilizer. We're able to have increased yields because we're breaking a lot of those pest cycles. We're able to reduce our herbicide and pesticide usage because the rotation does that for us. And so we don't have as many highs and lows when we have diversity in our cropping system. Okay, so then the one thing that we probably almost only look at when we think about oats is our gross returns, and that's probably why we don't grow small grains as much as we used to. So the 2-year rotation over, you know, almost 10 years of this study almost always has higher gross returns, you know. The 3-year and the 4-year, we probably are break even or only a little bit better in that oat year. But we can't forget the cost of the inputs in those systems. So we have much higher costs in the 2-year compared to the 3 and the 4-year, and labor is included in this. So, right, we would have 33% more labor in the 3 and the 4-year, but even with labor, that fluctuation in the fertilizer expense really bites us. So then our profits are virtually the same between the 3 systems. They're statistically the same. But in the 3 and the 4-year, we got better soil, we got cleaner water, we got less greenhouse gas emissions, we had less swings in our profitability. So diversity really slows the system down, you know, puts some calm into the 2-year system. Yes?
When did they start valuing those things? You just mentioned it.
The cleaner water?
Yeah. When did they start putting the value on them?
That's a great question. So, and that actually is kind of my last slide. So this project that we started, Small Grains in the Corn Belt, is to help send you all a nice signal from these potential buyers that says, we want to buy small grains again where our mills happen to be. You know, like Pepsi's mill is not very far from here, but they bring all their oats in from Canada. Quaker is not very far. There's all these assets really close to you all, and they happen to be bringing it from very far away. So we're working with companies like that are mentioned here to try to drive this to say, okay, you know, Purina, why couldn't you buy a little bit of oats, feed it to some animals, you know, and then that makes Walmart happier. So I don't think Walmart's going to ever give a premium to the farmer. In fact, it's doubtful. But could they just buy more products? Could they sell more mayonnaise? Could they sell more pork chops or whatever? And so that makes JBS or Smithfield happy, and then that drives the system. We work with ADM and Unilever on the Sustainable Soy Program down in Des Moines, where those farmers receive a 10-cent premium on their soybeans. And as those farmers make changes over time, they'll continue to receive that premium. So that's about $5 an acre. And so over time, if the farmers, stop doing cover crops or stop doing diverse rotations, maybe that premium will go away. It seems to me that most farmers will tell me if they could just sell the small grains consistently and knew they had a consistent market, $2 to $3 a bushel is okay if they can have a consistent market. But right now, there's just not really a consistent demand signal. So that's a long answer to your question. I don't think there's going to be a premium paid. It just looks like we're going to try to convince them that they'll sell more product if they start pulling more, because we'll have cleaner corn and soybeans going to the market. Okay, so this is an infographic just setting up the 2-year versus that 3-year. And so, on farm, if we did our books thinking about the rotation over a 3-year period, so our denominator's 3 as opposed to 1, small grains would have a lot better signal on our books. And so we have to think about all the other benefits that we get from that. And then at the end of the day, if we think about that denominator being a 3 denominator as opposed to a 2 or a 1, small grains is not bad. I mean, this system looks pretty good. And the oat price that he was getting over those years was $2 to $3 a bushel. I mean, it was what you all are getting as well. Okay, so one other way to get started with this, if you haven't taken advantage of NRCS cost share, you could work with Minnesota NRCS or Iowa NRCS, and if you ask for practice 328 and 340, 328 is diverse crop rotation and 340 is cover crops, you would get around a $40 to $45 per acre payment to do a diverse rotation, and it's a 3-year contract. So that really helps reduce that startup funds, the risk that you would take on by growing a new crop in your system. And NRCS has those funds available. So with Iowa, we're working on increasing access to those funds, and then our project for this graphic goes into Minnesota and Wisconsin. Yeah.
But you can't harvest the grain from cover crop.
So 328 is the small grain payment, and the cover crop payment would be of like a red clover with radish mix. It'd be the diverse cover crop mix. It could really be anything. But by bundling 328 and 340, then you can get that payment for 3 years in a row, and you can harvest the small grain. So if cover crops, like if you put in winter small grain like rye, and you only got the 340 payment and you harvested the rye, you can't do that. But if you mixed it with radishes afterwards and crimson clover or whatever, then you can get the 328 plus the 340. Yes?
I don't have equipment, and I was paying somebody to plant it, paying somebody to harvest it, and I just decided I might just plant a cover crop the whole year rather than raise this small grain that I'm losing money on. I mean, if you're breaking even, why not just go into the NRCS and plant a cover crop all year, and rather than try and harvest something that you're worried if it's going to hit the test weight and it's going to go down and all these problems we have with it. Just another thought,
Yeah, so
the same benefit that you're getting here if we did a cover crop all year.
yes, so I would love for everybody to be doing cover crops, and they'll find some cash in cover crops, but for Iowa, we're gonna need 10 million acres worth of cover crops to deal with our water quality problem. That's 400,000 acres worth of seed production. Why can't we do that in Iowa and not in North Dakota, right? So that cereal rye could all be grown in Iowa, and then it's co-seeded with red clover and radishes and, do whatever you want to do for the diverse cover crop mix. And then that helps diversify another 800,000 acres of corn and soybeans, which then has all these other market benefits, right? So currently with this project that we're doing last year, and we work with grain millers on this project, we helped farmers grow oats, and then most of them sold it to local feed mills, and some of them sold it for cover crop seed like farmer to farmer, bin run seed. And even though many of them did make the test weight quality that like grain millers would need, to get started, it's gonna go into local markets. And so it's a little bit more hassle. So this project, we hope to help, make those things easier. So we have a list of groups that we know will take oats locally, that will take small grains locally, the feed mills that will. And then we're just trying to, sneak in small amounts into maybe larger confinement operations. So I calculated if all the hogs in Iowa for just 4 weeks were fed 10% of their ration as oats, we'd need 500,000 acres of oat production. And right now in Iowa, we grow 55,000. So it wouldn't really take a lot, you know, but we just have to want to do it, and we have to carry those water quality benefits to the brands, to the labels, to demand it, yeah.
How about barley for feed grain? Because I know
Sure.
people that use a barley instead of a soybean for chickens and hogs.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
cereal rye. We're gonna have a speaker later today
Yeah.
talking about cereal rye.
Yeah, we can do all those. Winter barley in Iowa's a little tough because, like what Kevin said, we don't have the snow cover, and so we don't have consistent overwintering of winter barley, but we can grow spring barley. Oats is probably going to be our best yielder of the small grains. Yeah.
I really like the whole concept of the rotation. I'm from South Dakota where we raise a lot of oats. But my concern is if this was taken on a large scale, what your model would look like with an oat price at $1.25. And that's my concern. Anytime we have a good thing going, we overproduce it, and then that's going to change your model for the most part.
Sure. So his comment is like, what if everybody tomorrow decides to grow oats and we have 2 million acres? So cereal production worldwide is on the decline, while cereal demand, like in granola bars and everything, is rising. So we actually really need more total production of oats, total production of the cereal grains to meet people's food demands. The market that we really want, and that's like my blue side is the food side, but we have a tradition of sticking oats into hog rations in Iowa. We were doing this up until like corn prices went crazy. It was pretty standard. So we can still get rid of quite a bit of oats through all those darn pigs that we have in Iowa. Like we have a lot of livestock. So I'm not too worried about getting rid of 1 million acres of oats. And we have cover crop demands. 23 million acres worth of Iowa soil could be covered with cover crops, and we don't grow near that amount of seed right now. So I guess, bring me 1 million acres of oats. Let's just do it. We will get rid of it. There's plenty of cover crop acres that could suck it up if we can't get it through all the feed.
Did you mention there was 6.5 million acres of oats in Iowa?
Yeah, I mean, Iowa was the top producing oat state in the nation up until the 60s, and we had 6.5 million acres of oats. And that was going into feed, predominantly. I mean, some of it went in, some of it went to the food grade side, but food's not as much as what pigs will eat, right? Livestock will consume a lot more. But the cover crop demand, I don't think we realize how really big that is. That's a lot of acres. It's a lot of demand. Yeah, Matt.
Do you ever have any issues getting red clover established with rye?
No, but other people do. I don't know, my farmers are great. So rye's really aggressive in the spring, and we were nervous that if we just frost seeded it, the rye's just gonna take off and, it's a good stand. Winter wheat is probably easier. In fact, Keith probably would say that he disagrees with me. But for whatever reason, they've really made it work. So a couple things they've done is get in with the red clover as early as possible ahead of the rye really taking off, so the red clover can get going. So frost seeding, if you don't know what I'm talking about, that winter grain is out there. We start to have the freeze thaw in the spring. We go out and broadcast the red clover on the soil surface at like 10 pounds to the acre or 12. And then through the freeze thaw in the morning and the afternoon, the seed moves down into the soil and will establish. So we have some farmers that are doing that, and they just try to get out on the rye in that first freeze thaw as soon as possible, because rye will grow at very cold temperatures. Or they're actually, in the morning when it's frozen, kind of scratching it into the surface to get it even buried quicker so it can take off faster. And for whatever reason, it's worked really great. Yeah.
You've been involved in cover crops for a lot of years. Do you ever see a time in the future where land values will be based on soil biology versus yield per acre?
Yeah, so the comment was, will we ever be buying and selling land off of like organic matter levels or soil biology levels? So we do work with a few land management companies in Iowa who aren't buying and selling based on that now, but they're starting to take soil samples to see if over time they can position themselves different from the other land managers to be buying and selling land based on practices that those farmers are doing. So we see that, and then we see a lot of landowners come to us saying, I really want a cover crop farmer, I want a diverse rotation farmer, and young guys positioning themselves differently than their neighbors to be able to get access to farmland by saying, I'll do cover crops, I'll do it, I'll do diverse rotation, so they can actually farm land that they can't rent right now. So maybe, yeah. I mean, we should be selling land on organic matter already, you know, and management, not just how we do it now. Other thoughts? Great. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so you kind of touched on this already. So you said you don't see Walmart paying a premium for some sort of rotationally raised system like this. Do you see how do you see that working out economically for farmers long term? You feel like you're gonna have to figure out a way to use that denominator of 3 or 4 and look at their long-term return rather than the 1-year return, or do you feel like companies will eventually pay for sustainability objectives?
So Mac just asked, you know, will Walmart ever pay, and what's that going to look like, or will farmers just have to figure it out? So I think the farmer, unfortunately, I think farmers will be forced to make these changes, and then the companies will benefit. So my best case scenario is that we get out ahead of it and say, we can bring corn and soybeans to the market that are cleaner, that provide all these other benefits. We just want to make sure you pay us for it. And so that could be through a checkoff, that could be through the associations, the commodity groups could get involved in that. Because we already know that like the millennials who eat, probably not this plate, but they eat some plate like this, they're really driving those changes. And we already know, like with our Unilever project, that they're selling more mayonnaise because these farmers are in this sustainable soy program. And those farmers are only getting $5 an acre, but they're implementing cover crops at $30 an acre. So I really think it makes sense for farmers to kind of say, let's bring a cleaner product to market. We just want you to buy those oats. We just want you to send us that demand, and then we can just, you know, create that system again. Yeah.
Have you noticed any difference in water holding capacity on the ground that you cover crops with corn and soybeans practically when we go along the ground?
So what's the water holding capacity on soils that have had cover crops and those that haven't? Yeah, so from when you have a high organic matter soil to begin with, it's hard to pick up differences in changes in water holding capacity. But from like work that Keith's worked on down in Ames, after 10 years in a corn soybean rotation that's no-till already, with cover crops we see changes in organic matter at the 10-year mark. If we added livestock to that system and manure, especially composted cattle manure, we could see an improvement in organic matter in about 5 years in those systems. And organic matter is going to help with that water holding capacity, that ability to have better pore space, you know, those soils that I showed you earlier, we need to improve those bulk densities so that there's more pore space so the water can stay in the soil and, you know, the system can be buffered better by these soils. So that water holding capacity improvement that we would see in that 3 and that 4 year, you know, that's from feeding that soil biology year round, but in an already good soil, it really takes probably like 10 years with just a 2-year rotation to see that difference. This is just after, you know, 2 times through the system, so it's twice out of 6 years. We already see those improvements. So I'd say if you're just gonna grow corn and soybeans, do cereal rye every fall and put cattle manure on it and graze cows on those corn stalks. And I bet in 6 years you would see those differences.
Any other questions?
Yep. You did red clover, that was, payback on that was just in the nitrogen.
The red clover was just for the nitrogen. Yep.
Actually, you would probably get a crop of hay too off of that.
So it's a balance. If you take that hay, then that's less nitrogen potential that you would get from that green manure. So like even that N content of that alfalfa versus the red clover, you know, if we treated alfalfa like a green manure, then it would have higher N than than what it does here where it has 121. So it's a fine balance. Now, this is in a system where we're gonna till that under, and so our no-till farmers, that red clover N is not really it's not available as fast because I'm burning it down in the spring and then interseeding that corn into it, like what I showed on Dick's system. So one thing Dick has been doing is definitely putting side dress or something on early, because that red clover, that N is not as available as if you turned it under like in an organic system or a full-on tillage system. So one thing we're messing around with is putting a radish row, and this is what Dave does, putting a radish row in the fall into the red clover. And then that radish is gonna die, and then plant the corn off of that radish row, because radish will flush like 50 pounds of nitrogen the first warm days of April. It cycles nitrogen extremely quickly. So it would be like a 2x2 fertilizer, you know, it'd be like a UAN or urea or something that's over the top. So for the no-till guys, we have to modify the system a little bit than what Matt does where he incorporates it. So if you took a cutting of the red clover, back to what you actually asked, I would say you should stick a radish in that spot where you're gonna plant the next year to get that end cycled really quickly. So the radish is like super low fiber. It makes a lot of nitrogen in the nitrate form available very quickly in April from soil studies that we've done. So it would just make sense to like make those tillage strips and then plant corn on it the next year. Yeah.
Currently, the farm program is driven by corn and soybeans. So if you grow a small grain, you can analyze yourself. If some towns have paid farmers upstream for your water production clubs to grow small grains. Now, if you're the type of person that believes we aren't contaminating the soil with water, some people believe that. Some people believe we are contaminating water and soil. Do you see a farm program that could change to grow small grains because of the quality of water?
Yeah, so crop insurance is gonna be the answer to that. So one, if you do wanna go to extended crop rotation, you should use whole farm revenue insurance as opposed to the individual policies. Whole farm. A lot of local agents are kind of not up to speed on whole farm, but it is available. And so it would make more sense if you were gonna do diverse rotation. But like one thing that we push with cover crops is a good driver discount in crop insurance. So if you do a suite of practices like cover crops and diverse rotation and reducing tillage and better nitrogen management, which should result in lower nitrates in the water, less soil erosion, less drought stress on your corn in July, less disease pressure from soybeans, you should get the premium discount. And those who don't do the suite of practices should have to pay the whole thing. So one thing we're pushing federally for crop insurance is that it rewards those farmers. I think that's probably the only place where I could see farmers doing diverse rotations getting that benefit back at the from the federal level. Like I don't think there's gonna be a handout on oats, you know. We're not gonna pay a direct payment on oats probably. I mean, I think the food companies should say, you know, I want to have less greenhouse gas emissions, or I want to protect the Mississippi River, or whatever. So they should be the ones I think that pay for it a lot. But there is NRCS dollars to get you started, you know. So there is this NRCS funds, 328 and 340, to get you started. And then whole farm would probably be a preferred crop insurance option. Yeah.
Do you see any allopathic properties with the rye across the red clover?
Well, rye does have allelopathic properties, and red clover is a very small seed, but I guess I haven't, so the symptom of allelopathy is delayed germination, and I just really haven't seen it. It does affect small weed seeds. That's a good question. So it's not reducing the stand of red clover, so it's not delaying germination enough to affect it agronomically. So I guess I want to say no, but that's a great question, yeah. Yeah.
I just want to say that I was recently at a conference in Denver, and they said that the organic feed industry is at $8 billion right now and only getting bigger.
It is. One note though, half of our organic grains come in from China. So it would be great if the Organic Association said, we're gonna have a label that says US grown organics. Because we have no idea how well that paperwork is, you know, we don't really know if that paperwork's truthful, of the grains that come in. So that one worries me. And two, those companies need more pressure. General Mills has talked a bunch. And it's time to like start buying some oats. Yeah. And Pepsi. Like if Pepsi's under, you know, writing all that research, come on. Yeah.
Just one side addendum to that though, our farm had a contract with General Mills summer of 2015 to deliver so many bushel of organic oats, because like this young lady said, they're doing a complete shift towards organic market. Well, what happened is that General Mills found out that there was a wide divergence between the quality of oats they're getting from farm to farm.
Yeah.
And because of that, over a 2-month span, they completely shifted their policy from buying from individual farmers like me to they went out and bought thousands of acres of organic land to manage their own oat supply. So we have to be careful about that. These large companies, instead of dealing directly with a farmer, they just go out and buy their own land.
Yeah, so it sounds like we need an oat association, you know, or with checkoff dollars and stuff. No, but I mean, if farmers got organized, you know, they could provide the market and say, we provide it with greenhouse gas reductions, we provide it with improved water quality, oh, and it's got a 35, 36 pound test weight. Let's figure out what to do with it. Yeah. And just on the organic comment, this obviously sets you up for a good transition to organic, where commodity prices have been very stable for organic over a long period of time. So, you know, you could diversify your portfolio and do some organic maybe and do some non-organic.
Maybe one more question.
Okay. Yes.
You showed data on planting in red clover. How about interseeding red clover?
Like as a cover crop?
Yeah.
In corn?
Six corn.
Yeah. So we've tried a number of cover crops interseeded into corn at the V4 stage, V6 stage, V8 stage. I'd say probably annual ryegrass is the only thing that survives. Red clover does okay. Yeah, it just doesn't get very big. So its nitrogen contribution to corn in that year, it's definitely using nitrogen to get going, and it would be using nitrogen to create the nodules, the soil nitrogen, not its own nitrogen as it creates nodules. So I don't know if I've seen in the literature a positive corn yield response to red clover interseeded into corn.
It might not be the first year, but overall in the 2, 3, 4 year plan,
Yeah.
you know, you're still getting that living root in there and all.
Oh, absolutely, yes. I would love for interseeding cover crops to work really well here, but we have 30-inch spacing with 36,000 population with 10-foot tall corn with sometimes droopy ears, droopy leaves. So we need like an upright corn, probably 36-inch spacing, and probably like 32 population.
Well, you can make it work.
Yeah. I'm not opposed to it, but it's never going to give you the power of the red clover from this. Like, yeah, because I'm talking about like way less fertilizer. That's going to have some rotation, a little bit of rotation benefit, and that we need to mess around there. Absolutely, yeah. And I should probably go.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks.